The Only Good Priest. Tom and Scott Mystery, Book 3. Author, Mark Richard Zubro. St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 5. We returned to the fire scene. The charred embers and smoke added a murky smell to the neighborhood. The crowd began to drift away. I watched the firefighters sifting through the debris. I watched Neil and Monica talking to a fire captain, and as I turned to make a comment to Scott, I saw Priscilla glance furtively in every direction and then slip around the corner of the Lakeview Learning Center, cross the parking lot, and head west on School Street. I nudged Scott. "Come on." I quickly asked Neil to meet us for dinner the next day, then sped after Priscilla. I explained as we went that I wanted to follow her. I didn't like or trust her. She was too good to be true as a suspect. Maybe she was up to something tonight. I hope so. I peered carefully around the building, walking rapidly. She'd already reached the L tracks. Slipping through the shadows, we followed her. With only an occasional glance back, she hurried 6 blocks straight west. We paused in the shadow of the Woolworth's doorway on the southwest corner, where Lincoln School and Marshfield meet. Further west, we traveled to the northwestern railroad tracks. Ravenswood Avenue ran north on the east side of the tracks, and then south on the west side of the tracks. On the east side, it's less than a street, but more than an alley, filled with bushes and barbed wire to keep people off the tracks. North, we crept past Henderson Avenue, with its grassy parkway down the middle, then a quick movement under the tracks to the area of town called Roscoe Village. Then up the west side of the railroad tracks, just past Cornelia, we lost her, in the shadow cast by the Ravenswood L tracks crossing high above to soar across the northwestern tracks. We halted to search the darkness ahead. We waited several heartbeats, then dashed for the opening she'd passed moments before. I peered around the corner. Nobody in sight. Only occasional shadows and silence. Ahead, to the left, numerous semi-trailer trucks lay nestled into loading bays. Mostly we saw the backs of small businesses and one-story factories. On the right, recently repaired barbed wire rose to a height of 6 feet or more. Feeble light drifted into the darkness in small doses, not enough to cure the urban murk. Priscilla had either spotted us and lay hidden, or had entered one of the surrounding doorways. I couldn't see to the far end of the alley. I couldn't tell if it was sealed at the end, or even if paths ran along it, providing an escape. "Stay here," I murmured to Scott, and hurried cautiously forward before he could object. I crept down the left side of the alley, feeling more secure among the crannies and crevices of backyards, garages, and garbage pails. Then, crawling amid the trucks, unhitched trailers, and open bays. From what I could make out in the dim light, most of the delivery bays gaped emptily, stripped of merchandise before giving ideas to nighttime marauders. The distant lights glinted off random truck windows. I'd entered a muffled world of scurrying rats, crumbling concrete, and lurking darkness. Occasionally, the sounds of traffic on distant streets drifted into the eerie gloom. The empty windows of the backs of silent factories stared darkly down at me as I eased from one window to the next. Training in the Vietnam jungles as a Marine years ago made my senses keenly alert, aware of my surroundings and where possible dangers might lurk. The slither of tumbling pebbles stopped me. In front or behind, I couldn't tell. I melted into a deeper shadow next to a crumbling wood fence. The boards of the rickety structure creaked as I crouched against them. I snatched glimpses of the buildings around me, my sight obscured by my crouched position, and listened intently for the recurrence of noise. Faintly, I heard the whisper of cloth against cloth, definitely behind me. I strained to look over my shoulder, turning only my head, but my shoulder moved and tapped an eighth of an inch of heavy jacket against a loose board. With a whoosh, the whole damn fence pitched over. Fortunately, the cacophony, when it hit the ground, made less noise than fireworks in Grant Park on the 4th of July, but not much less. Anyone listening would think a tank battalion had chosen this moment to rumble up the alley. Still crouched and trying to stop the boards and noise I had unleashed, I bashed my knee against a trash can, which tipped over, spilled its contents, and began rolling away from me. An instant after silence finally fell, I sensed movement behind me. I whirled in time to see a vast form looming up, swinging awkwardly from my cramped and crouched position. I managed to land a fist in a midsection. My attacker gave a loud ugh that rang a dim, distant bell. "Scott?" I muttered. "Motherfucker!" he gasped. He'd fallen toward the light. He sat gasping for breath. I inched over to position myself protectively over him. "You should have stayed back," I whispered. "Look, General," he said between pants. "Vietnam was a long time ago. You can give commands to your kids at school, but I'm not waiting out there for you to be beaten to smithereens in here. You don't make my choices." But for us, the alley remained silent. "I didn't want you in danger," I said. "Fuck that shit. We're in this together." "Sorry I hit you," I whispered, with a final gulp. Regular breathing fully restored, he said, "Now what?" I let my eyes rove around the darkness. "We could try to explore the rest of the alley," I suggested. He got to his feet and walked boldly to the middle of the alley. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded in a normal voice. He said, "Half the universe could have heard us already. If they didn't hear, they're too far away. If they did, they ran. Or they could be waiting in ambush," I said. "Look, Jungle Jim," he said, "I respect all your expertise, but let's cut the shit. We explore the alley without killing each other, and then we go home." "Quietly?" I said. We proceeded slower than a walk, but faster than a patrol through the nighttime jungle. At the end of the alley, a 12-foot chain-link fence blocked our way to the right building, and fence joined. Between the last building on our left and the fence, a foot-wide path led into further darkness. Priscilla had either snuck into a building behind us, found a hiding place, or taken a path. I pointed toward the opening. Scott glanced behind us, then toward the deeper darkness of the new opening. "Let's go back to the street where there's light and see where it comes out at the other end." A truck started behind us. Headlights snapped on. The cab of an 18-wheeler lumbered into the center of the alley and turned toward us. We both swore. I heard gears shift. The truck leaped toward us, heedless of noise. We rushed to the opening. Trash cans flew along with other unknown obstacles as we kicked them out of our way. The path twisted and turned. With so little light, we bumped and stumbled into each other in numerous nameless obstructions. We heard harsh laughter behind us. A final plunge through thick evergreens brought us out onto a sidewalk in busy street. "Where the hell are we?" I asked. "I think this is Addison," Scott said. It was useless to go back, so we trudged over to Clark Street and the car. We stayed at Scott's Lakeshore Drive penthouse that night. In the morning, after barely 4 hours sleep, I sipped coffee in the breakfast nook of the kitchen and watched the early dawn light ease its way over Lake Michigan. I drove to school for my morning picket duty. The negotiation team members had separate shifts. A few kids showed up to cheer us on. The temperature hovered in the low 30s. Only a few lumps of black-encrusted snow huddled in the shadows of the school reminded us of the storms of December. At 8, 2 teachers crossed the picket line. Kurt Campbell, our union president, always on duty, remained impassive as we watched them move into the buildings like shamed criminals avoiding the TV news cameras. I boiled with unreasoning fury, which surprised me secretly, I guess. I had told myself all along that this union stuff was peripheral. After all, I had a lover with a fabulous income. Others in the picket line screamed bitter hate at the scabs. For most of my colleagues on the picket line, this was their only income, and these people crossing the line threatened their livelihood. It hit me deeply. I had it easy, but I found I cared. All our hard work, and those fools lost their nerve. Kurt had to be impassive. He'd feel responsible about violence, I knew, and he'd see their side, but he didn't try to stop our people from shouting their fury. For his sake, I held my tongue. The parents' strike support committee brought us coffee and rolls around 9. The temperature kept us moving and grumbling as we traded places between warm cars parked across the street and the line in front of the school. At one point, late in the morning, Kurt thanked me for keeping my cool. When the scabs appeared, we sat in my pickup truck and talked over strategy. He tried talking to the superintendent of schools informally. No dice. They're hoping for a below-zero cold wave to break the strike, Kurt said. He sipped coffee from a styrofoam cup. Bastards better not underestimate us. At 3, my relief showed up. Scott had a photo shoot all day for a fashion magazine. I picked him up on Michigan Avenue in front of the Art Institute. At 5, we met Neil for dinner at Genesee Depot. First, I asked Neil about Lesbians for Freedom and Dignity, the group Priscilla had mentioned. He said they were women who'd formed a sort of street gang years ago, tired of wimpy men not taking back the streets from rapists and gay bashers. They started patrolling at first. It was 3 or 4 of them coming to people's rescue. Over the years, they'd grown more and more violent. Lesbian radicals from hell, he snorted. I don't care what they call themselves. That's what they are, and as humorous as the name sounds, they're dangerous. Police suspected them of bombing church rectories in which pro-life activists held meetings. You heard about the bombing at the Chancery a few weeks ago? Neil asked. We nodded our heads. A security guard had died in the explosion. I have no proof, Neil said, but I think they were behind it. He'd suspected Priscilla being one of the guiding lights of the group for some time. We asked about the break-ins at the Gay Tribune. He said there'd been 3 in the past year, each more destructive than the last. Neil believed Priscilla or Monica or both knew who was doing it, but he had no proof. We speculated on what information Bartholomew might have had for us. Over dessert, I pressed him for more information about Priscilla and the Lesbians for Freedom and Dignity. Publicly, they disrupt things, but only on a sporadic basis. You've met Priscilla, close to her tamest. You can't imagine a room full of such women. He explained that the group might not surface for months at a time, then for several weeks, 5 or 6 would show up at every community meeting or service demanding equal representation for women in all minority groups, being horrified if your meeting wasn't wheelchair accessible, insisting that pro-choice and the ERA be put on the agenda, demanding liaisons with the feminist community, asking for co-chair personships, co-treasurers, co-secretaries, 2 for every office, male and female, on down the line. Why not say yes? I asked after he finished his litany. I got puzzled looks from both of them. I said, put them on every board and committee. No one could possibly attend all those meetings and do all that work. Neil laughed. They wouldn't do the work even if they did show up. They're nuts, Scott said. I watched Neil wince in unaccustomed agreement with Scott. That, and they're dangerous. Surely only to themselves if their keepers give them sharp objects, I said. You're making jokes. These people are committed as only fanatics can be, but more. He agreed with the police in believing the Lesbians for Freedom and Dignity were responsible for bombing churches where anti-abortion groups met. Nothing's happened in Chicago yet, he said, but my sources say they're the ones responsible for the bombings in San Francisco and one in New York. Lucky for them, no one's been killed. Somehow I found the whole scenario hard to believe. What's kept them in line here? I asked. Think, Neil said. What keeps most gay and lesbian organizations for maximum effectiveness? Internal bickering, I said. Got it in one, Neil said. We told him about chasing Priscilla and following philandering Clarence. Did you know Sebastian was HIV positive? I asked. In the confusion of the fire the night before, there hadn't been time to mention it. Neil looked startled. I don't believe it. I told him what we'd learned from the police. Neil shook his head. I guess it's true if they found it. He never mentioned having sex with anybody. I've known him for 10 years and he hasn't had any operations where he might have gotten transfusions. As far as I know, he never had any. Well, he got it some way. If he knew he had it, he never told anybody as far as I can tell, I said. If he could keep that secret, he could obviously keep his mouth shut about how he got it. After dinner, we walked over to the Gay Tribune offices. I wanted to see if Monica Varlane could give us any leads on the Lesbians for Freedom and Dignity. We found her hunched over a computer on the second floor of the office. Not a trace of yesterday's mess remained. They'd covered over the holes in the wall with red poster board. A few staffers sat at the other consoles on both floors, each peering at his or her own screen. Monica suspected Priscilla was one of the organizers of the women's group, but claimed to know little about them. Priscilla is widely disliked, she said. Often that keeps her from getting elected to an office, but she'd be at the center of it. She's perfect for that kind of meeting. Energetic, opinionated, unwilling to listen, and out of touch with reality. I can see why you're not a member of a nut group, but why aren't you more of a feminist activist? Scott said. She gave a pleasant ripple of laughter. She pulled out a cigarette and holder, lit up, took a drag, whirled it in a deft circle around her left shoulder, blew a perfect smoke ring, then said, I don't have to be. I'm rich. Fuck this powerless movement shit. Take the lesbian radicals from hell. I like Neil's name for them. They have a manifesto of sorts calling for all kinds of absurd kidnappings, bombings, and assassinations. Even if they managed all of it on a large scale, there's no revolution coming. A lot of innocent people could get hurt. They'll fade away and the world will go on very much the same as if they had never existed. Doing things my way has more positive effect for women than all the bullshit talking they do. By the way, you're wrong to call them a nut group. Why's that? Scott asked. Monica explained that while she only knew a few of the women involved, she could understand why some of them would be radicalized. She told us about a few of them. One woman named Stephanie, now grossly overweight and deliberately letting herself look ugly, had started out as one of the most competent emergency room doctors in Washington, D.C. She'd worked long hours without pay with the homeless. Late one night, 5 of the men she'd helped the most had cornered her in a clinic office and raped her repeatedly. Only one of them was ever convicted, and he didn't serve time. Another woman named Sally had grown up in the Catholic ghetto in Belfast. She joined a radical group after her parents had been murdered by a terrorist organization. For a while, she tried making a life for herself, working with battered and abused children in the slums of Los Angeles. Her best friend, a man, turned her into the authorities. Some of them have good reason to be angry, she said. I asked about Priscilla, specifically mentioning her actions of the night before and the attack on us with the truck. Monica didn't know where Priscilla might have been going. She warned us about trying to catch her or interrupt one of the group's meetings. These people are fanatics, she said. Generally harmless, but when pushed, who knows? Even I got ugly stares the one time I walked into a meeting, and I was invited, she shrugged. They've all taken karate or judo or some type of self-defense classes. Stephanie, the D.C. slum doctor, spent a couple of years overseas training as a terrorist. Could Priscilla or members of her group have killed Sebastian? Monica puffed thoughtfully on her cigarette for a minute and then said, No reason. Although a few members of the group do hate the Catholic Church in a generic, I hate all religions way. She said the woman saw Western religions as part of the oppressive patriarchal society. I didn't necessarily disagree with them about that. We asked her again about the mystery man Sebastian met on Sunday nights. She repeated that she knew nothing. We walked over to Roscoe's, the bar with Sebastian's picture. The front room is partly wood paneled with a mirrored back wall. One of the charms of Roscoe's is its large front picture window, where you can gaze at the passers-by on Halstead Street. Only a few patrons filled odd corners of the bar on a Tuesday at 8 p.m. The muscular bartender stood maybe 5'6" and must have weighed about 160 pounds, given a fireplug effect. He stared hard at Scott as we ordered our drinks. He brought us 2 Watneys on draft. Scott held out a 20 to pay for the drinks. The bartender shook his head. Scott Carpenter doesn't pay in this bar. He paused and asked, almost shyly, Why are you here? Are you... He let the question dangle. Scott used to be paranoid about being seen in gay bars. He's gotten much better. Now he simply says, Yes. The bartender said, Oh, wow, Oh, Scott said, This is my lover, Tom. We need some help. Sure, anything I can do. We showed him the picture. He nodded immediately. I recognized the guy in the picture. Can't miss him. We get priests and seminarians in here all the time. He's the only one who wears his priest outfit. You know that? Collar Catholic priests wear. He wore it in the bar. He got some odd stares, and a couple of people got real obnoxious. Wanted him to solve their sins and that shit. I had to throw out one guy who got abusive about his childhood at a Catholic school. Wanted your guy in the picture to make it better. He ever with anybody, I asked. He was always with some group when I saw him. How about just with one person? Maybe they look like lovers? He shook his head no. He suggested we try the other bartenders. They'd be back in about a half an hour. Most of them bowled on Roscoe's sponsored bowling team on Tuesday nights. They'd be in after their game for a drink or two. Someone else in the group might know more. We sat on the couch in the back patio room next to the fireplace to wait. 45 minutes later, we moved to the front room and saw a happy, smiling, giggling group gathered near the front of the bar. Goosing and shoving each other, they bellied up to the bar in high good spirits. Seems they'd won that night. We strolled over and caught the bartender's eye. He got them quieted enough to listen to us. I thought I saw nods of recognition from several of them on seeing Scott. Gay, ex-high school jocks are pretty much like straight ex-high school jocks. They read the sports pages, watch games on TV, join the softball league. The bartender explained what we needed, told them they could trust us. A few doubtful glances, one shrill, "Oh, you two are so cute together." We showed them the picture, the quietest one, short hair, with his chin on the shoulder and his arms around a lithe, muscular, effeminate guy, said, "Yeah, I've seen him." His dark eyes shifted from the picture to us. Sad puppy dog eyes. I'd be surprised ever to see smiling happily, set in a likable face. No smile, but pleasant. A few inches shorter than us, but muscular and slim. The face of someone you could talk to. "I only work part-time Friday and Sunday nights," he explained, moving away from his friend. He tapped the pitcher. "He comes in every Sunday around midnight. He drinks Chavas on the rocks. I'd say about 90% of the time a guy joins him. The priest always arrives here first. He waits for his friend while looking out the picture window." I asked for a description for the friend. "Miller Lite, no glass, no tip. Priest, always tips $1. He paused to think. "Maybe a black-haired guy with his hair all slicked down like from the 50s. Quite dresser. Button-down shirts and slacks. No jeans. Maybe in his late 40s, a slight paunch, but in nice shape. I remember them because it's pretty quiet on Sundays, and they're usually here." "Ever hear them talk?" He shook his head. "Not to remember a name or anything. No luck?" His buddies shook their heads. They'd never seen them at all, according to the bartender who'd seen them. The mystery man hadn't shown up the last 2 Sundays. We talked a few minutes. One timid soul asked Scott to autograph a bar napkin. Scott did so. We left them to their celebration. We ordered another round of Watneys and took them to the back room and sat on the couch next to the fireplace. We didn't have much, but it was a start. Several times I tried to start a conversation with Scott. I had my back to the room, and he kept looking over my shoulder. Finally I said, "What?" and turned around. In the same room, across from our cozy area, people had gathered around the video machines. One, a pinball game, set unused. 2 men in deep concentration played at the other, a Tetris game. 4 guys stood around them, drinks in hand, groaning or cheering at the activity on the screen. I do not have Nintendo or other video games at my place. I used to play them for hours. Over time, Scott brought me several advanced computer programs and games. About 4 years ago, I realized I'd gotten too involved. When the sun rose on me, hunched over a video screen, and I hadn't been to bed all night. We had a few minor fights and one major blow-up about the time I spent playing them. Fortunately, the time I met the sunrise with Nintendo had been during the season while the team was on a road trip. Scott came home to a video gameless house. He keeps a few at his place for my nephews and nieces to play with when they come over. I control myself and ignore them. In the bar, I couldn't make out clearly the faces of the players. Scott rested a hand on my shoulder. "Isn't that the cop? What's his name? Turner?" I shifted position. "Which one?" "At the game. The far one." I craned my neck. It sure looked like him. Dark-haired, tight blue jeans, a red sweatshirt, white Adidas tennis shoes, eyes glittering, one hand deftly maneuvering the joystick, the other making rapid taps on a control button. "A cop here at a gay bar?" "Don't be prejudiced," Scott said. I had visions of undercover cops and entrapment. I moved to join the group, not sure what I wanted to do. Scott followed the guy working the right-hand control, lost with one line left to go over at 90,000 points. The cop passed 140,000 before the game beat him. He laughed and reached behind him to his left to grab his drink from the table. The group drifted away and we moved closer. He held a quarter, but checked his watch as if deciding if he had time for another game. "You guys go ahead," he said, easing off his chair and looking at us for the first time. I don't know what I expected, but he smiled and said, "Hi, Tom, Scott. Good to see you." He pointed a thumb at the machine. "You play?" "What are you doing here?" I demanded. His smile vanished. He looked from one to the other of us and raised an eyebrow. "Drinking beer and playing video games," he said. Scott caught the humor behind the crack and forestalled any comment on my part. "You on duty?" Scott asked. "No." Turner smiled matter-of-factly. He said, "All three of us are gay." "Oh," I said. I'd never met a gay cop before. Never bitched one as 30. Good-looking and athletic. We sat together for a while, sharing notes on the various degrees of closetedness forced on us by our desperate jobs. Turner seemed quite comfortable. He pointed to Scott. "You don't announce it on the pitcher's mound." He turned to me. "You don't announce it in the front of your classroom, and I don't announce it to the squad room. Our friends know. My family knows, and they cope in one way or another, just like us." We told Turner what we'd found out. He said he'd be interested in talking to the mystery man if we could find him, but he didn't think it would do any good. "Look, you guys," he said, "you're not going to get anywhere. First of all, you've got to prove it's murder. Figure out how somebody did it and why, all without making it obvious to anyone you're investigating." I interrupted. "Maybe they used a drug or poison." "Possible. Prove it." I couldn't, so I shut up. "You've talked to people." "Just like I did. The guy was a goddamn saint. Nobody had a reason to kill him." He took a slug of beer. "Yeah, it's suspicious that the Chancery and half the cops in the city are covering up. Maybe the church doesn't want people to know some of their priests are HIV positive on occasion. I'd read about priests dying of AIDS, nothing widely discussed, often with the distinct impression the church was doing its best to pretend it hadn't happened. I asked him if he'd heard about Lesbians for Freedom and Dignity. "Oh, the group they call lesbian radicals from hell? Obviously more people than just Neil knew the pejorative nickname for the group." Turner explained that the police didn't buy into conspiracy theories as much as they did in the days of the infamous Chicago Red Squads. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, the cops had spied on peace groups and other activists. Suits had been filed, a stink raised, and finally the cops had lost in court. I take them seriously a little more than some, because I've heard from guys who've covered events they've tried to screw up. He proceeded to describe the fanatical nature of the women who wore the green and white lesbian radical from hell, but buttons and t-shirts. On occasion, they drove the cops nuts. Nowadays, police receive training in being restrained, but these women never lit up. So far, the women had stopped short of physical violence, but had given themselves up for arrest. A police record was claimed as a badge of honor. Those women without one being something less than true radicals. He checked his watch again and excused himself. "It's after 9. I've got to pick my kid up from a seminar. He's been to it at the Latin school. After he retrieved his coat from the top of the video machine, he came back over to us." "Drop it, you guys. Seriously. It could only get dangerous, and people could be hurt." He leaned closer. "No, I haven't given up my investigation. I'm too good a cop to let them stop me, but I've got to be careful. You guys can only get hurt." He shook hands with us and left. At Scott's, the answer machine blinked red off and on. My brother Glenn's voice told me to call him no matter what time we got in. It was just after midnight, and I thought of not doing it, but I'd never had that kind of message from him before. I punched in his number. Glenn snatched up the phone before the end of the first ring. "Jerry's missing," he announced. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.